Welcome. So typically, I light my candle before I start my lives. And today, I chose to light my candle after I started, even knowing that it might be a bit of an awkward start, but to include you in a very small ritual before we dive into the power of ritual. Hello to those of you who are joining. And I invite you, because this is specifically about the power of ritual, and what I want to talk about are some things I want to talk about that might seem more like ritual or turning things into rituals. And some of it is really what I want to talk about, especially so many people, really all around the world, as far as I can tell. Like, to me, the prevalence of celebration and ritual around this time of the year points to it's not that any one tradition or any one ritual or any one religion, obviously, is like right, but that there actually is a power to this. And I think that's true around, there's different times of the year where you just see, like, throughout cultures all around the world, there's some sort of ritual or celebration. And to me, that's sort of like a really useful thing as a human to go like, so there's something here. And I can choose from the rituals and traditions that are being offered, either by the culture I was raised in or the culture I live in, or I can look around and go, oh, around Halloween, there's the way that looks in the more European world. There's Sigaki in the Japanese, like, Buddhist traditions. There's Day of the Dead, and that. So it's just like, oh, there's clearly something to this time of the year. Where do I want to draw from? Because we're so global now. And I know it gets tricky with ideas around cultural appropriation, but I do believe that, especially when we come with an attitude of reverence, that it will be okay. So anyway, that's a bit of a tangent, but the beginning, I was saying, I lit my candle before we started, and this is one of these tricky things, is that there are some rituals and traditions that I think are truly there for a reason. So we tend to bring light and fire, both of those. It's like, oh, the light itself adds something to a ritual or creates something as sacred. And the same with fire. I mean, fire is a transformational element. So it makes sense that around the world, fire is brought to the altar, brought to the celebration, brought to. So I light a candle. But it is important that as you take things that are offered, either by me here or as you look around at the holidays, the traditions, the celebrations, the rituals, that you go like, oh, I can feel something in this for me. Or at the very least, I trust that there's something in this for me. So it becomes less of this, like, I'm gonna just slap something like holy on and hope that it feels better. That's really the thing I want to talk about, is how do we make the mundane a ritual? And some of that is by bringing, these ritualistic elements in, but some of it really, I believe, has to do with attention and intention. So I just realized I got on that tangent because one of the main reasons I wanted to talk about this now is because there are so many people all around the world heading into both what could be very ritualistic times of the year, all depending on whether you celebrate Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or Christmas or Diwali, or like there's so many celebrations. Whether you see this as the new year coming now, or whether it's, I don't know. However, I do know that around the world, there really are thousands upon thousands of people who are entering into some form of larger cultural celebration and ritual. And many of us are also heading into some of the most challenging circumstances that we will put ourselves in all year long. Because many of these rituals involve family, they involve our kids being with us for longer stretches of time because they're out of school. They involve crowds, they involve a lot of things that can also be quite stressful for many human beings, and especially those of us who have slightly more sensitive nervous systems. I count myself among the sensitive. So there are some very simple ways to do that. And, at the very beginning, I brought in a candle. So some way, whether it's a candle or whether it's simply a thing, an object, something, what can remind us, oh, we're entering sacred space. Hint, it's all sacred space. So it's about, even before, I guess I would say, the physical manifestation of that, I was going to back it up a little bit, is that does come to attention and intention. I do these lives. I mean, what am I doing? I'm sitting in my office and I'm talking to a computer screen. And objectively, like, just if we were just looking at like the data, we could call this maybe one of the least sacred things I could be doing. And so I believe that it's sacred, and so I make it sacred on purpose. And it's the same with things like cooking or eating or going to bed, waking up, so many mundane moments that have the opportunity for, oh, I'm going to remember that these are all moments to bring ritual, to bring some element of the sacred, however you define that. So for me, that's the reason that I said sacred sovereignty and the power of ritual, is that there is a way that this way of relating to life, this way of moving through your day, this way of moving through the seasons, through what we might call the holiday season, these are tools for a particularly intense, potentially challenging, this is a full time of year. Even, I have generally found that even for people who aren't necessarily celebrating or aren't necessarily doing something or going somewhere or something specific like that, there's a fullness. And so I bring it here in particular, but really this just offers us the opportunity to look at the way that it is always so. It is always so. And that allows us to bring then into the sovereign being that we are, that I am, that you are, the strength. Really what this is, it cultivates our sovereign strength to move through the world in a way that in some way it's like it creates our capacity to move through the world the way we want to, with the kind of intention we want to, creating what we want to create, receiving what we want to receive, like having then the power ultimately to make every experience, every interaction, every task on the to-do list, I call it sacred, you might call it intentional. And when we make it intentional, then that calls forth ultimately, I mean, the English language is sort of failing me, but it's like our power to live in it the way we want to live in it, to experience it the way we want to experience it, and to respond with intention, to respond with integrity. So the more that we enter into these moments with some intentionality, saying like, okay, I'm going to light a candle here, or I have all kinds of like woo. I have these crystals over here. I have an altar on my work desk because it reminds me that everything I do here is sacred. It has intention. It reminds me to bring more consciousness to my experience of sitting down to do my daily work. Whether my daily work is, to be in interaction with you beautiful humans out there, whether it's to be in more direct interaction with the clients in my programs or my one-on-one mentorship clients, or whether I'm, paying bills and responding to email, or, these things that can seem so mundane and menial. I sit at this desk and there are things here that remind me that these too are sacred acts. These too are spaces I can bring my attention and intention. And in that way, have more conscious response. Like, I could be like, rah, 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 I have so many emails and like it's such a burden. Or I go, oh, right, this is another opportunity to be the human that I want to be in this world in every moment. What is the human that I want to be? Do I want to be a human who is, physically and emotionally, energetically relaxed and soft? Do I want to be a human that, and I don't think these things are what's the word I'm looking for? They don't have to be intention point, right? They're not opposed to each other. But I can be a human who has efficiency and effectiveness, and a human whose breath is soft and open and wide. I can be a human with humor, and a human who, is going to get through like her whole to-do list to do that. One of my mentors, Rich, quoted something to me, and I don't know who said it, but he said, first we create our environment, and then our environment creates us. And, it may not always be super, super simple in that way. That might be a simplification. I also think it's true, right? So I put the attention and intention. I put the time into creating an altar, and I put the time and the intention, the attention into tending to it, making sure that the candle is fresh, bringing fresh flowers, taking it all apart and dusting, putting it back together, paying attention like, oh, this thing that's there, that's no longer the thing that really belongs there. Now it's something else. Like I was just redoing a much bigger altar I have in my living room for the month of December to hold a certain theme for myself. And, for me, it's a very intuitive process. Maybe different for some people, but I would encourage you to bring your intuition, to bring your feeling sense, let go of like, well, this is what December means, or this is what, new moon and Sagittarius means. And some of that is really going to serve you, and it will be true and right and beautiful. And some of it will just be like bullshit that you fill your mind with so that you can't hear your own truth. But I'm taking on the intention of like self-mastery and victory for the month of December. And so, I close my eyes and I also walk through the house, and I sort of have this, I'm like, what is it? What feels like that? Like, what am I drawn to? What calls to me? And I gather those things and I start, sort of aligning them and putting them and creating them. And for the last couple months or so, I had gone through a really deep process around the Venus retrograde that we were in. I'm losing people, I can tell, because they're like, oh my God, this woman's like batshit crazy woo-woo. Ultimately, whatever you believe in is the thing that you will make sacred, and it doesn't matter what that is. But the point being that I had put all this intention and attention on that, and that felt a certain way to me. And I had all these pictures of my teachers up on the wall above the altar. And I went and like sat with that yesterday because I thought, well, of course, I'm going to leave all my teachers up for victory. Like that was a no-brainer. But when I actually felt into it, most of them came down. It was a very different feeling. And so I paid attention to that. So that's my invitation, is to the thing that I would say that separates sort of the mundane, if you will, or the casual, is really the thoughtful from the thoughtless, the filled with intention, bringing consciousness to, versus, you know, unconscious habit, reaction versus response. Sort of, it's really about the consciousness, the intentionality, the feeling into, which again is attention and intention, like taking the time and the attention to do that, and that will change it. So you can, you know, oh my God, rush, you know, and I do this. I don't say any of this to be like, and my life is perfect in every moment and everything is just so, because it's not. Some of you know me more personally and you know, like that would be bullshit if I was said that. So I do my best not to lie. And, but there is something about really going like, okay, so I can rush around and like, you know, throw a cup of tea together because I need it, and I'm also doing 10 billion other things and like this. Or I can be like, oh, okay, this is a brief moment that I can bring my attention to. How do I notice, even as I might be moving quickly? So one of the things I remember my teachers at the Zen monastery I lived at, which was here in California, would talk about, because here in California, when we bring attention and intention to things, we get really slow and like, it's like this, and we don't move fast. And, you know, anyway, there's like a California thing that like comes into it. And they were like, these two things they don't have to go together. It doesn't mean they can't, but they would talk about in the Zen monasteries in Japan that everybody moved like really fast, but it was precise and it was on purpose and it was intentional, but they were moving really fast, like they got shit done. And it kind of changed my relationship to that, right? It doesn't mean like, oh, I have to make a whole precious morning of morning pages and a cup of tea in perfect quiet and these kinds of things, but they are moments to bring attention to. And so one thing that I was going to say at the very beginning, and then I got off on something I wanted to come back to, is that our breath is one of the most important rituals. And it's the most, I mean, in some way, it's the perfect ritual because we always have it. If you don't have it, you're dead, at which point you can cease to do ritual, you know, or you just bring whatever then is, I don't know what the next realm, I don't know what the dead realm of ritual is, you know. But you always have your breath. And so that is one of the simplest, one of the cheapest, one of the most effective, like all these is like bring one breath to something. Instant ritual. So the moment of the tea boiling, right? Turning it off. Like what if there's one breath before you pour it? What if you take one breath to notice? I mean, I don't know about you all, but like smoke and steam, to me, those are such beautiful moments to recognize. It's kind of like the world giving us, what do they call those? Like the Dummy's Guide to, they're like the Cliff Notes. It's like the Cliff Notes to presence. You know, if there's smoke rising from incense or a candle, there's steam rising from your bath or the tea. It's like it's giving manifest quality to what already always is existing, but we can forget. And so those are these, you know, it's like they're just given to us like gifts, but we can pause and notice. And so for me, the frameworks and the teachings that have to do with sacred sovereignty, they're woven into our lives. And then there's always some piece, some theme that gets pulled out and becomes clear that this is the piece to bring forward in the actual sacred sovereignty weekends that I teach and that I lead. And we have an opportunity to be together for, 3 days practicing these kinds of things. And it always looks different because, again, like I could talk about this forever and never touch the fullness of it. This is really about how do I bring intentionality into the truth of my life. So the way this is going to play out in your life is going to be different. I can sort of lay things out. I can make suggestions. I can point to these things like smoke and steam, and maybe they'll spark something for you, or maybe yours is totally different. But they're all opportunities. I remember, I think it was the last Sacred Sovereignty weekend that I taught. It might have been the one before that, but I think it was the last one. And we went on lunch break, and I had this experience that I can't remember now exactly how it started for me, but there was some moment of I walked out of the venue and I wasn't particularly hungry, and something caught my eye. It was like some sort of beauty, if it was the wind and some flowers, or it was a bright color, or there was something like sort of drew me, and I thought, okay, well, I'll follow that. And I followed that direction, and I saw whatever that was, and from there something else caught my eye. But it's the difference between sort of like just wandering aimlessly and sort of being on my phone at the same time, and I have nowhere to be and nothing to do, so I'm sort of checked out. And then what ultimately became a very conscious, but also aimless in the sense that I didn't know where it would ultimately lead me. I never knew what the next step was going to be until I was in the midst. Sometimes I didn't make it to whatever the thing was, but something would sort of call me in a direction, and then something else would call me in a direction. And I ended up having what I called when I got back. It was like a being led by beauty walk or lunch or experience, right? It was like I was led by beauty. And it ended up having these like incredible synchronistic experiences where one of it ended up being like a sound rather than a visual beauty, but there was like something, and I was like, what is that sound? At first I thought it was a child crying, and then I realized it was parrots. And so I was sort of drawn, and I was looking, and ultimately realized that there were a number of parrots like in this window of this house, and I could see them, and then that drew me to something else. So it was like everything led together to be just this perfect mix. Like Emma said, synchronicity, walk with the universe. It was totally that. But what I shared that with the women of that weekend. But what was important for me to share about that was that I knew that part of the reason that I could do something like that actually also came from like stability practices that I've done that have to do with silent and still meditation, and years really spent cultivating that kind of attention, so that it is less of just a like, oh, I don't know, I know it's over here, and I never really actually touched in on anything. I actually touched in on everything, but I let it lead me, and I was able to let go into that. So what these kind of rituals that guide and lead and hold our life are, they're so vast and varied. A couple other examples that I want to give. I always think about, one of the things I loved in living in the monastery that I lived in was the ritual way that we would eat. And in Zen Buddhism, it's called oryoki. It's very, very formal, There's certain chants that go with it's these 3 bowls all wrapped up in a cloth tied a very, very specific way. Your utensils fit into like another little pocket, and anyway, everything is set the way that it's meant to be. It's not, you don't get to be like, and then I think I will do this. It's like you have chopsticks and you have a spoon, and anyway, it's all very, very set. And then there's a whole way of bringing then your stack of bowls out when it's time to eat. There's a whole way of like, you bow to them and you put them out and you lay the whole thing out. Everything's meant to be folded and unfolded a particular way. There's chants that go with certain pieces of being served and then of starting to eat. And then there's a certain way that you ask for seconds. And then you clean your bowls right there. And then you tie it all back up. And anyway, the whole thing, I loved it. And it's one of the things that I probably miss the most about living in the monastery. And I think in so many ways, what I loved about that was how much ritual there was. And so I think that cooking and eating and cleaning, like these are prime opportunities for ritual. And especially as we go into potentially cooking for many, many people, or enjoying other people's cooking, or not enjoying it, but being kind and telling people we're enjoying it anyway, or how we're going to engage in the whole process of food, like production and creation and laying out and eating and putting away. Like every piece of that can be so beautiful. It can be so beautiful. It can be like putting things in their little Tupperware containers and putting them in the refrigerator, or labeling them, or, all of these things can be made beautiful, can be made sacred. How we support each other in the cooking, how we both give the people who are cooking space and also offer our support, how we, like, this whole element can be so sacred. And it gives us a place, like I would say sacred sovereignty, right, is the recognition of our wholeness in relation to other humans and the world. And so entering into a time of, often much celebration, often many friends and family and gatherings, is how do we find that sense of wholeness and then come into relationality? Sometimes it's relationality with the world, right? Relationality with our own food while we sit alone. But that is why bringing this sense of ritual is so important. It's ultimately deeply, deeply empowering. And it brings us a way to come into these circumstances with wholeness. And again, coming back to the breath, right? It might be, I take a breath every time I walk through a doorway. So, when you enter the house walking in, right, a breath before there's any kind of reaction, ultimately that will create a more sacred response, a more whole place to come from. A breath as I walk through between the dining room and the kitchen, a breath as I walk, each of these moments is an opportunity to make the space sacred, to say I'm moving on ritual ground, even if all I'm doing is, playing Yahtzee with my children and my grandmother. Like, this is an opportunity actually for the sacred. So the other thing that I want to say is that we can do this without anyone else needing to participate. And that's really important as we head into these circumstances where we might wish that our friends, or we might wish that our family celebrated differently. We might not see what they're doing as sacred, and we might want them to do it our way. So how do we even maybe sit down at the table and hear our grandfather's grace as something sacred, even if it's not the form of grace that we would want to say? And then how do we bring our own form of blessing to the food in a way that also says, yes, I include me here? How do we, sometimes that you might offer to bring that also to the larger, but it can be very, very personal. No one needs to know if you take a breath as you walk through each doorway. No one needs to know, if you're, peeling the carrots for a dish, that you're saying a little blessing with each heal. Like, no one needs to know these things. They can. I'm not saying you can't tell people, but there can often also become this disconnect. And in that way, I mean, I really believe we create this sacred field around us. And the question becomes like, is sharing this going to create more ritual, more of this sacred field, or less? We don't always know. And we can always make mistakes, and then we go, oh, okay, learn and do something different. So prayer, however you view that word, however you hear it, whatever that means to you, maybe it's intention, maybe it's prayer. You can do that with the lighting of a candle. You can do that with a breath. You can do that with a step you take. You can do that, you can say some intention or some prayer as you put your children to sleep, as you fall asleep, right? These are all things that can be brought in to create ritual that ultimately allow us to bring more of our own wholeness as we walk through the world. Also, when I lived in the monastery, we used to spend much of our day in silence. And so we were given this tool, basically, for relating to each other as we would meet throughout the day, given that we were in silence, because the sort of traditional habitual ways of like, hi, how are you? Or, it was like removed from us because we were asked to be in silence. And so we would just bow to people on the path. Now, in normal life, that could be super weird. But again, it becomes this piece of, can you internally, within yourself, can you bring something of ritual into the realm of coming in contact with other people? Whether that's, like just like a literal bow inside your own heart, whether you really make a point, especially, again, whether you're engaged in these festivities or not, many places in the world, not just the Western world, but many places in the world, there's a lot of bustling activity. And it can become easy to sort of like, zone the people out, but making eye contact is a kind of ritual. It says like, I am here and I see you. And that kind of when, a shopkeeper or a checkout person says like, how are you? And maybe they look at you, maybe they don't, maybe it seems like they care, maybe they don't, but like that stopping, maybe it's a breath, but the pausing and the saying like, oh, I'm okay, or I'm fine, or I'm well, how are you? It doesn't have to be a big deal, right? It doesn't have to become this whole authentic, like I really need to tell them like the truth. It's just a real moment to the willingness to actually stop and say, oh, you asked me a question. I'm going to respond. I believe this is actually a form of the sacred. This is a form of ritual. This is a way of including attention, intention, consciousness into this moment to moment everyday life. So to me, this is about looking at actually your whole life as a ritual or as a prayer. And doing that consciously. And maybe that changes. Maybe you have an actual prayer, that you bring into space or into activity, especially repetitive activity really can have like some sort of prayer attached to it. I mean, I think there's been lots of like tricks and tips and life hacks around certain things like this, but ultimately I believe the deeper intention to many of these actually has to do with making things sacred and bringing ritual. If you're paying somebody, actually like, oh, like gratitude that I have the money to pay, or sending a blessing with it, or, it's just like, how do we weave this in so that it doesn't always have to look like ritual? There doesn't always have to be a candle. There doesn't always have to be sage and Palo Santo. There doesn't always have to be mantra playing, although there can be, right? Maybe you light some sage before you pay your bills and you say, oh, this is going to be sacred activity where I give thanks for, the fact that I have a cell phone and that my heat works and like PG&E is available to me. And what, like sort of this actually an act of prayer or ritual, that these things exist, that I get to have them, that I have the opportunity to pay for them. These are rituals. These are ways to make it a sacred act. And in doing so, it's like my experience is that it's like, I don't know, I don't have better words for this, but it's a little bit like, I become more powerful, but at the same time, the space itself is imbued with power. So it becomes less sort of about like my personal power or like taking my power back, and more the sense of like, oh, right, like I am a whole sovereign being stepping through the world, moving into these circumstances, responding in various ways, bringing consciousness, bringing intention to my actions in the world. And therefore, everything around me, for lack of a better word, is better. And in the women's program that I lead, Fierce Grace, one of the pieces that I brought in for the month of December is for each woman to choose her own intention, basically to be devoted to for the month. But it's like yes, in a personal way, but broader than that, like in a transpersonal way, like not impersonal, but like transpersonal, like like if one was to be devoted to connection, that it's less about like, oh, the connection right now between me and you, and somehow I'm going to make things more connected, but more like connection literally as an energetic in the universe, the energetic of connection, the face of God or the face of Goddess that is connection. And how do I make every moment an act of worship, an act of devotion, an act of honoring connection in the world, whether I feel it in that moment or not, whether I feel like it or not. Like, how do I actually moment to moment go like, yes, I honor connection. And I hope that it affects everybody. I can only take it on in a way for myself, and I don't necessarily, it's not about like, I want to make you more connected, or I want to make us more connected, or something, but it can only be a blessing if connection is created in the field. Even people that we think like, we're like, well, I would like to punish them and then they'll be different and then things will be better because they have changed. I believe that we have more power in this kind of creation. And again, like if the people I think are the most horrible in the world, I actually believe that if they felt that, like the essence of connection more deeply, if they felt the essence of freedom more deeply, if they felt the essence of love or self-love or all of these different energetics that we could call on, if they truly felt that more deeply, our world would be a better place. Our world would be a better place. And so I do believe that there's something about ritual that requires that it be beyond our personal selves, and that it can't, like, ritual that is co-opted for like me is weaker, and at its worst it could be harmful. But there's a way, again, like in the Buddhist teachings, we always give away the merit of all of our meditation. We dedicate we dedicate chanting, we dedicate practice, we dedicate, like in yogic traditions as well, like there's always sort of a giving away of the benefit. And that's my encouragement. It's sort of like, okay, I'm going to make my life a ritual, and then I want to give it away. Like, I want it to be wider than just for me. So, in closing, I'm going to take a little quick look at the comments just to see, mostly people checking in. If there are anything you want to share, having heard whatever part of this you were part of, any experience from your own life, or any questions, either just about something that I said or a specific in your life, like I would like to bring ritual to this. Let's take the next several minutes and feel free to bring any kind of questions or comments or shares in. And I want to look a little bit like, kind of functionally, like in that tangible side. Okay, so how do I do this? How do we do this? And the first way that well, actually, I'll back up. Wasn't the first one that I mentioned, but I do think that the most primary is our breath. And some of that can be very structured conscious practice, which will inherently bring consciousness to our breath more. So different breathing practices, doing meditation that focuses on the breath, like ways of practicing that ultimately bring more consciousness. These are rituals we can build into our life that will ultimately then support breath awareness. And then there's the very simple, which is like throughout the day, I just want to notice my breath. And it is helpful when we give ourselves some signal. So walking through a doorway is a great signal, right? Could be your car door, could be the house door, the door into the bathroom, out of the bathroom, into a store, out of the store, each time, one breath. So these kind of reminders are helpful. They're helpful just so they go like, oh, right, yeah, breathe again. And the more that is like a ritual that we carry with us wherever we go. No accoutrement necessary, just lives inside of you. So I would say that is the most primary. And that's the one that can truly be brought to anything. And that can, in some way, I guess this is like, maybe gets to the root of it for me, is that I believe that breath is sacred. And that there is this way that when we come in contact with our conscious breathing, we come in contact with this kind of sacred sovereignty. And it allows us that contact more and more. And I'm a big fan of practice. So I think there are many, many things that truly support us. But I'm a really big fan of just woven into daily life practice. And that the children can be there, playing or screaming or jumping, and that our parents can be there, and that we can be at work and do this, and that we can, like this is available to us anywhere, and we can truly make any spot that we sit or stand or walk, we make it sacred ground. And the most primary, the most basic, the simplest is with your breath. To bring more conscious breath to any moment makes that moment more sacred. And then the secondary piece is this piece around the quote that I shared, which is, first we create our environment, and then our environment creates us. So a lot of the examples that I gave are a little bit more in the realm of like woo spirituality, like a big altar in my living room. Like I can't walk through my living room and not see this like enormous altar. I can't sit at my desk and not see my altar. I have kind of like a little teeny altar above the kitchen stove because that helps me. There's a teeny little Buddha there and a painting and all these beautiful seashells that and stones that my children and I have found, right? These things actually bring me into a certain kind of presence. Intentions can be, written out and post-it notes, or like tacked on the wall, written on bathroom mirrors, right? These are things that can help. So while a lot of mine often seem more in that woo-woo spiritual side, my invitation really is for you to go like, what will bring me, how do I need to create my environment so that my environment reminds me to create ritual here? Do I need to put something on my refrigerator that, is a simple reminder to create a ritual of bringing the vegetables out of my refrigerator, and then, another one up on the cupboards here, so that when I go to chop them, I'm reminded again that, this is a ritual. How do you need to create your environment without perfectionism and rigidity, like, well, I need everything to be in exactly the right place or I can't deal. And I mean, in all honesty, I know the feeling. Like, I said to my kids the other day, I was basically like, he said something, he didn't want to do something. He was like, I want blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, it's not going to happen. I said, you know what I want? I want the house to be perfectly clean and my children to not whine at me for an entire day. Like, but I don't get that either. So looking at, again, what I call the ecology of your life, the truth that your life actually as it is, not the ideal life, the way we think it, like in some future iteration it will be, and then things will be perfect and beautiful, but your life such as it is. And maybe that does involve clearing something. Maybe it involves making sure that one area is clear all the time. Maybe it's literally you wash the dishes every night, and that is actually a ritual. It's a ritual, not like, I have to wash the dishes, but like, oh, I do this in service of, my own feeling of freedom. I do this because it creates calm and peace and ease. As I do this, I give thanks for all the dishes I have. I give thanks that we have enough food to eat on dishes every day. I give thanks that my family's healthy. I give thanks that I can buy organic produce. I give I'm so grateful. And even if you I would say don't lie about it. Like, you don't feel grateful for certain things, like don't make it up, but see if you can bring like the feeling of your hands in the warm water and the soap. Like, is there some way to be like, okay, this is a ritual and I honor, I have these plates that we use more often that I don't think about as often, but I have these plates that aren't like fine china, but they're really beautiful. And I actually bought them when I separated from my ex-husband. And I was like, well, these are mine. I didn't need to think about, okay, did anyone else like them? They're very, very simple, sort of cream colored, and then they have these blue circles and then these little birds. And, there's just an honoring of like the beauty of them when I wash them, or like, wow, I still have them, these many years later, or whatever it is for you, something that could be a ritual. Is there some way to make your tea or your coffee in the morning more of a conscious ritual? Is there a way to serve the children breakfast that's a little bit more of a ritual? What is some way that brings some intention and attention into your life? And make it workable, right? My kids and I, we only say we do a blessing at dinner time. We don't do it at breakfast time. And if we're home for lunch, we don't do it at lunch. Like for us, it's like, okay, that's the rhythm that works. Again, this becomes very personal. Like part of the reason that I have things like stones around the house is that they're very grounding for me. And that's literal. Like, I think that is the energy of the stone, right? I have some big ones in certain places and then a lot of little ones. But it's more important that you feel it than that you take my word for it. So what can you place where to support your intention, to support your ritual, to make that space sacred? What can you put where? And let it be your own. I just had this idea. I was like, oh, if people like took pictures and sent them to me or posted them in this thread, I would be just delighted at like little nooks and getting to see what makes that spot sacred for you. And it may seem spiritual and it may not seem that way to anyone but you, but it makes sense to you, and that's all that matters. So Emma said, I'm going to take up the ritual of, I think that's praying with my son every morning with a little verbal acknowledgement. I don't have much time to actually remember to take up practices with a little baby. And even when he's sleeping, I just don't seem to manage it. But this at the beginning of the day will raise my consciousness straight away. As I'm writing this, he's woken up, so there may be mistakes, but thank you. Oh, that's wonderful, Emma. So I'll just say this, in case maybe I'll write a reply so you can come back and see here at the end. But that's perfect, right? That Emma is beautifully demonstrating what I was talking about around the ecology of your life. And rather than saying like, I'm going to do all the things, she has a very young baby and she has another child, and what can bring just that thing for a little while. It's gotten quite cold, so I haven't been doing it the same way. But I started reading in the mornings, because I would go and I would make my cup of tea, and I would then make breakfast for the kids. I give them the same thing almost every single morning because they don't complain. And then I put it on the table, and then I would take my book onto the front porch, and I would take my tea, and it's a novel. I mean, you can read whatever you want, but for me, there's something important about really the joy of reading. I'm not trying to learn something, and I would just read my novel, and I would watch the sunrise, and then when my tea was done, I would be done. Or maybe I needed to sometimes be a little bit quicker to get the kids to school on time. But this sense of that brought consciousness to the start of my day in a different way than trying to get things done, or or getting on Facebook on my phone in the morning. It was it brought a certain kind of consciousness so to me, that's ritual. And in that way, I enter the day more connected to my own sacred sovereignty, more able to respond to my life, to my children, to all the different pieces that come my way. And again, I'll just say that how this looks in practice at our Sacred Sovereignty weekends is always different. I have never taught the same weekend twice, but there are always themes that make their way, and then there's what I sense, and so what I bring in, and then ultimately weaves with whoever is there in the room. And the women that are there and their dynamic and what they need. And so if that's you, I wanted to let you know that the early bird tickets are on sale, and the price will go up January 5th. So it's a month. It's a month for early bird tickets, and it's always a really, really deeply beautiful experience of discovering the truth of sacred sovereignty, and then each woman's unique way of embodying and expressing and really living that through the truth of her life. So I hope that there is some benefit to you here. Thank you for being with me, whether it's live or in the recording. And I wish you beauty, some sense of the moving through your life with beauty for the day. I love you. Ciao.